our population continues to grow. And therefore, even if we all stay the same, the amount of energy we would want or need will grow.
Yeah.
If you think about you, your kids, what's going on in your kitchen. Yeah, everyone's got a laptop. Everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's got kind of some other device, Game Boy, whatever it is. The amount of consumption of energy is going up. And so the need for more power is going to increase. Where one gets that power, nuclear, natural gas, coal, hopefully not, remains to be seen.
Hello, and welcome back to the Future of CRE Sustainability. I'm your host, Sean Swentek. Today, I'm speaking with Brad Molotsky, partner at Duane Morris. Brad, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure's mine. Good to see you, Sean.
Likewise. As someone who's been in this space for quite some time, you've witnessed the evolution of commercial real estate sustainability for decades. What are the most surprising transformations you've seen in the industry in the past 5-10 years?
Is that your polite way of saying I'm old? I'm not sure. I think that there's been early on, so call it the kind of mid 2005, 2010, when I first started playing in the space. I think that big landlords were paying attention, but they were paying attention in the energy efficiency space. And so they were looking for ROI, they were looking for a return on their investment where they could be more efficient. And that, frankly, back then was like a Republican thing. Somehow along the way, a bunch of the R's kind of said that's not for us anymore, which is a little bit odd. Why wouldn't you be for energy efficiency?
Mm-hmm.
And the D's kind of took on that mantle a bit of efficiency that evolved into clean energy, that evolved into or part of the discussion on climate change. And so if we go back to the original question, which is what have I seen change? There was, I think, in the Biden administration, there was a lot of movement under the Inflation Reduction Act and activity, more so than there had been in the previous 10 years or so.
Yep.
Now you're seeing a shift in that, sort of a retrenchment from the federal side, and they will not be pushing regulations. In fact, we'll be cutting back regulations. And so you're seeing, I think, two things happen. It's a little bit early, but two things happen. One, the states that are interested in this will step to the fore and will start to legislate, regulate in the space quickly. So we're seeing that a bunch. We can talk about that. Second, we're seeing companies pivot away from blasting out about ESG. So they've changed that. So now it's, instead of ESG, we're back to where we started, which is a little weird, efficiency. So again, how can one be against using less, saving money for the company or saving money for your tenants, and therefore garnering a better return? So I think you're seeing people recalibrate into, we're focused on this other stuff, climate change, and it's important to us, but we're not going to blast about that. We're not going to put that on our website. We're going to dial that back, and we're going to focus on things that are less controversial to people, where we know no one can be against, even though some are against efficiency, which is kind of bizarre. I don't get why one would be against an LED bulb and require that, get rid of the LEDs and go back to incandescence. That doesn't, really make a lot of sense. Freedom of choice, sure, but to mandate, that's kind of silly. So
maybe a descendant of Edison or something like that.
Yeah, it could be.
Can you share an example of a state that's starting to step up and enact local state level legislation around renewable?
Yeah, sure. So we got two different things. So if I get off on a tangent, just pull me back. Actually, three things. So we've got something called BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standards. Okay, so BEPS is local, but it's also state. It is focused on 10, 15 years ago, a bunch of cities, a bunch of states said, we would like to require you, a building owner of, call it 50,000 square feet or more, to report on things like water, waste, and energy. So it started out as a reporting thing. Then it evolved in some places to a commissioning thing. So when you drive your car off the lot, your car starts to go wrong the day after and so over time you need it tuned up. Buildings are the same way. Different people, different tenants, different spaces, they need tune-ups every now and again. So a bunch of places required commissioning to do tune-ups. The latest incantation of that which is, depending on your perspective, a little bit controversial, is BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standards, where a state or a city says they're each a little bit different, which is why it's a little bit problematic, annoying, because they're all slightly different, but similar in the context. They require a building owner to measure certain things, report on those things, typically greenhouse gas impact. And then if they're over a certain level, there's a fine. That's
Mhm.
the kind of controversial part. And so it's driving owners in particular places to not only pay attention, but to upgrade their building in order to stay below that threshold, or at least value what's the fine worth versus what's the improvement worth. And, there's some of that going on. Okay, so that doesn't, it seems a little bit innocuous. It is, but it's not. In where we sit right now, 25 early, although this changed yesterday, but as of 2 days ago, 14 places, so 2 states and 12 cities had enacted a BEPS requirement. So Washington and California, then 12 other places, New York, Boston, DC, a couple of them. So that doesn't sound like that much. California's so big, but that doesn't sound like that much. There are 46 other cities that have committed to, and or states committed to BEPS and
Wow.
said they were going to pass that rules and regulations in 25 or 26. So you're seeing, not everywhere, and you can sort of guess a little bit where this is going on. So it tends to be blue states as opposed to red states. There are these requirements that are either here or are coming relative to required reporting. And if you don't get to a certain place, a fine.
Yep.
Put aside whether that's the building owner that has to pay for it or the tenants who are causing, usage is what causes greenhouse gas impact, and what the lease structure says. So that's kind of a whole thing going on right now, and has been going on for, like, call it the last couple of years. So that's one thing. The second thing that's going on is, you'll remember, and your audience will likely remember, there was a whole discussion around the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, and required climate disclosure rules.
Yep.
Took the SEC forever. They issued these draft rules, and then they took comments, and there was like 10,750 comments. Literally, it was the most commented thing on ever in the history of the SEC. They then took like 8 months to sort of putz around and then reissued the rules. And then they waited again. And then they ultimately, like in October, September of 2024, issued their final rules. Okay. And in their final rules, they said, well, we're going to require scope 1 and scope 2 reporting, for materiality purposes. And you need to take that into account. And we've taken into account these comments, and the collective is a little bit nervous about scope 3, so we're not going to include scope 3. So the SEC passes that final rules. A lot of, from the people that didn't believe in climate change, people were pissed off. From the people that believed in climate change, some would say they didn't go far enough. So it's like, you can't get rid of it.
Yep.
Within 3 days of the rules becoming final, there were 9 lawsuits, literally. 8 of them from, like, the Chamber of Commerce and the petroleum folks, challenging the authority of the SEC to issue those rules. 1 from the Sierra Club challenging that they didn't go too far. So those cases all got consolidated into the 8th Circuit. The 8th Circuit was going to hear that case, but what happened? We had an election, change in view, change in administration. The new administrator, the head of the SEC, as of a month ago, said, we will not be pursuing this case. We are not focusing on climate change disclosure. So that, goes out with the bathwater. The SEC will not touch this for 2, let alone 4 years, if at all in the future. In reaction to that, or as part of that, depends on who you talk to, California, 2 years ago, had taken up the discussion of the SEC is moving too slowly. We are going to do 2 things, if not more, in California. A, we're going to require companies with more than $500 million in revenue to report on climate risk. You have to submit a report that says we've evaluated climate and it's either material to us or it's not. And if it's material, here's the 10 things we want reported on. So that was for companies making $500 million or more. So big companies. It wasn't $500 million of California revenue. It's $500 million of revenue, and they have some connection to California. It could be one employee. It could be an office. It could be we sell a product there. Not we are living in California. Okay, so Everyone's like, whoa, that's a lot. On top of that, they also passed a bill that said if you have $1 billion, so 500 million was the risk, report, $1 billion of revenue, you're required to report scope 1, 2, and 3. No 3 exemption. 1, 2, and 3. So it came under a lot of, consternation, people, teeth gnashing, hand wringing, the whole thing. It was challenged. That challenge, so a bunch of groups said it was unconstitutional. You're going too far beyond your authority. Judges, as of a month ago, tossed out the unconstitutionality part of the claim. And those 2 bills are law in California, and it's effective right now. So that is a law right now. The first reporting will be due in January of 26. And then scope 1, 2, and 3, 1 and 2 is 26, 27, 3 is 27, 28. Okay. So that's real and live. Again, states move sometimes glacially, sometimes quickly, but I've never seen a state move this fast. Election happens, new president comes into, power. So many things I could say about that. A new president comes into power. Different states took California's, bills, and New Jersey, New York, Illinois, Colorado all took the piece of the $1 billion bill, scope 1, 2, and 3, and in some form or fashion have that moving through their system. Okay, so you've got between California and New York, those are the 2 biggest states, kind of beyond Texas, but between the 2 of them, you're talking about a lot. And you add New Jersey, you add Illinois, Colorado is a little bit smaller relative to GNP. It's like 35% of the GNP represented the United States, a massive amount. And it's not all about, it is all about, but it's not all about scope 1, 2, and 3. They're going to need to, those companies that fall into that $1 billion or more. Each of the states adopted the California approach. You do not need to be located here. You just need to have contact here. Each of those states, they understand what they're doing. It's not so much the company. The company going to have to report. They're going to have systems in order to show that. They're going to have a third party assure that and to check it, different than their accounting group. As importantly, in order for the company to be able to do that reporting, they're going to need to go out to all their supply chain, not the big people, all of their supply chain, and ask them, okay, what are you doing here, so that I can take all that data and report that as scope 3, because scope 3 is your supply chain and your travel. And so it's going to have a massive ripple effect on anybody touching those big companies, which are going to be a lot of people. So you're talking about $1 billion companies in potentially, definitely California, potentially New York, New Jersey, Illinois. Maryland's got some form going around. Massachusetts is thinking about it, but they haven't done anything yet. Colorado had one, and then they backed off of it a little bit. They want to recalibrate it a little because they got some blowback. But even if it's just California and New York, New Jersey's kind of a play along there, even though I live there. Less relevant, but relevant. Those 2 states, the amount of companies that will be touched as supply chain to the $1 billion companies is extraordinary. And so that's going on now. New Jersey's bill is moving through their Senate. So far, Senate's controlled by the D's, and so is the Assembly. New York, you have a similar dynamic. Governor supportive, Governor New Jersey supportive. So it's likely, Illinois same, likely that those 3 states will follow form, and Maryland is likely to at least consider it. Massachusetts consider it. So that between BEPS, where you got this kind of required reporting in these 50 plus places, and this other thing, which, we'll call climate disclosure or scope 1, 2, and 3, there's a lot going on, from a state and or city local level. To go back to the BEPS point for a second, the cities you imagine are on there. So what you'd call kind of blue cities. That said, there are red states with blue cities in them. So like Austin, very much paying attention. Miami, very much paying attention. Atlanta, paying attention. Chicago, Illinois, paying attention. Minneapolis, Minnesota, very much paying attention. Has always been kind of one of the forefronts of, climate change and, lead. So there's a lot going on. It just, despite the fact that the federal government is doing a big pullback and looking to dismantle kind of the Inflation Reduction Act and doesn't, want offshore or onshore wind, doesn't want EV charging stations. One could talk about why that is with Elon Musk. But irrespective of that, the states are now, again, more energized than they otherwise would have been, in particular because of that. So you're seeing them, I think, move faster than they would have had it been a Harris administration.
Very, very interesting. Thank you
Yeah,
for
crazy stuff.
How have you seen climate risk change the way investors approach commercial property valuations, and how have we moved beyond like the misconceptions about what ESG plays in that versus like the bigger picture today?
I'm not sure we have moved past that.
Yeah.
So again, you got to be a little bit careful about, careful, but it depends who you're talking about, and it depends where we're talking about. So in certain places where you have foreign investors, so European investors, Canadian investors, UK investors, Australian investors, those places are 5, 7, 10 years ahead of the United States. And so if those investors, not only because of the EU taxonomy and they're expecting this because they get it over there, they will demand that if they're putting money in, that they get these types of reporting and that the company be focused on the attributes that they care about, which has led a lot of US money managers to at least understand what their demands are. In a strange world, it's not so strange. Most people think China is the biggest foreign investor in the United States. It's not. It's Canada by far. So Canadian investors are in the United States in real estate to a fairly well. And so their values are being ascribed to kind of their investment thesis. You have some state teachers retirement systems in the US, so CalSTRS, OSTRS, which are big state retirement pension funds that are very much paying attention to this stuff. So where they invest, they tend to, push their weight around a little bit.
Mhm.
Now, that you've also seen go the other way. So when the Republicans were or still are anti-woke, and when they were getting frustrated, a group of 20 state attorneys general in red states sued a bunch of companies that were asset allocators, saying that you're using ESG inappropriately, and not only shouldn't it be one of the factors, you're not allowed to use that as a factor in making decisions in our state. Okay. So initially folks were like, man, that's kind of nonsense. Well, it got some traction, and the big folks, BlackRock and some others, Vanguard, who were at the forefront of kind of the ESG movement, stepped way back and changed their language, changed their disclosure, stepped way back from ESG. And so, that kind of went the other way. You also saw, as part of the administration's executive orders, a raft of orders focusing on DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as you know, DEI is kind of the middle pillar, or one of them, of ESG. So E, environmental; S, social, diversity, equity, and inclusion; G, governance. And so that middle pillar was under attack for all intents and purposes, and continues to be. So you're seeing it in trans athletes. You're seeing it in what's being able to be taught in schools. You're seeing it in the military. Don't ask, don't tell evolved. It was okay. Now it's like totally not okay. So a lot of that has gone the other way, and that's in a variety of places. It's not only the federal government; it's states. And so, depending on where your assets located, depending on who your investors are, you're getting a little bit of push me, pull you on, is it important or is it not important? I do think more investors now, for sure, are paying attention and are pushing their interests because their money. And so that's nothing new, but I think that the sustainability type attributes are becoming a bit louder because they feel like they're being put upon a bit.
Well said. How are insurance companies responding to climate risk in commercial real estate?
Good question. I think that I would have said still early to the game there. It's still, I'll say, the third inning, fourth inning there. Clearly, insurance companies are paying attention. They weren't 10 years ago-ish plus, but they definitely are. They have modeling that they do. They allocate based on risk to premium. So they're definitely doing that. Whether they're doing it for their own portfolio is a whole other question. But relative to allocating risk and risk adjusting premiums, absolutely doing it. In the last 4 years, you've seen in a variety of places premiums 20% up, not just once, year over year. So you're talking about 20% on top of 20% on top of 30%. There's massive increases in property insurance. Where? Along the Texas coast, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, California. Why? Because the amount of billion, let alone $10 billion losses and events, weather events. So again, take it out of the context of whether human behavior added to that. I believe we did. But irrespective of what I think there, the reality on the ground is those events have happened and they're continuing to happen and they're picking up in velocity and severity. And so the insurance companies aren't stupid that way. They see that happening. They realize that's going on. Their modeling may not be perfect, but they're clearly modeling more events, more risk adjusted return to them, which means higher premium. And so you've seen that in the marketplace for sure. I don't see it as much when they go to invest. So they're not pushing that when they go to invest, although you would think that their investment committee would say, wait a second, why are we investing on this coastline? Why are we investing here where there's tends to be 20 different, wildfires? Why are we investing here where there's hurricanes? I don't think it's gotten there yet, but it's starting to. Like I've definitely heard from some of my friends at bigger real estate companies that their investment committee wants to understand, and they have like a sustainability person at the table. Hey, if we're going to buy something, talk to us about this BEPS thing. If we don't, does the building comply? And if it doesn't, what's that cost? So that's starting to get real. It's not totally there yet, but it's starting to get real. Having a sustainability person at the investment committee table or the asset management, that's definitely evolving and more. And some level of risk analysis on insurance and insurability, definitely going on. I had just cautioned my statement in the beginning on premiums, yes, for their own investment, maybe a little bit less so, but they're definitely paying attention. Definitely paying attention.
I want to make sure I ask this in the present tense and not the past tense for good luck. How are tax credits and incentives reshaping investment decisions in sustainable commercial real estate today? What are you seeing?
I think that a lot of people were interested in tax credits, and that drove a bunch of behavior for large plants in a variety of places. So again, some would disagree. The D's aren't stupid when it comes down to it. You saw tens of billions of dollars invested in red states for this particular moment, which is the moment of a Republican administration wants to gut, what the Democratic administration did before in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's running into a little bit of, originally no one wants to go against the president, and still is the case. But they're getting some headwinds on if you've got a $200 million or $1 billion chip plant or manufacturing plant, and it's thousands of jobs, it's hard to say, sorry, we're not going to do that. And people, local folks who voted for the president are getting frustrated. So you're seeing that happening in a variety of places. That said, it's a little bit too early to tell the tale there. I think that having read all the executive orders on energy, the president and the administration are focused on kind of an all-in strategy. Drill baby, drill it early. They are less concerned than prior administrations, we'll put it that way, in permitting concerns. So the permitting process, they want to be much easier. They want to be supportive of some of the people that were supportive of them. Take that as you will. So oil and gas are, it's going to be an oil and gas day, which is fine, I guess, if you're in oil and gas. So those projects are going to move faster and get fast tracked. So what's at risk? Well, what's at risk is the president has said in one of the executive orders where they declared, we're having an energy emergency. Some have said that's kind of nonsense. That's not true. That will likely be a court challenge. But in that executive order declaring the energy emergency, the president indicated, or the executive order indicated that offshore wind and onshore wind, no more. Not interested, thinks it's, not appropriate. Utilizing federal land to drill for natural gas and oil, on the table. So the flip of kind of that. Second, EV charging infrastructure. A big pillar of kind of the Inflation Reduction Act was to increase the amount of EV charging infrastructure in the United States so that people's range anxiety would be diminished and they would buy more electric cars. Some of the efficiency standards relative to EV trucks rolled back. So again, I think under the Inflation Reduction Act, wind not going to be relevant. EV charging not going to be stations not going to be relevant. In an irony, maybe Tesla feels like it's got enough Teslas out there and doesn't want other people getting competitive cars. Who would think that? And so the EV charging credits are likely to go away from the federal government. That's not going to stop the states from doing stuff if they want to. So if you want to see a state incent that behavior, they may still have the state benefit, but the federal side of it is gone, frankly, for all intents and purposes. Question on production tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. So there was a lot of incentives on producing sustainable clean energy. So where that goes is a question right now. A lot of credits were provided for carbon capture, and big companies, big oil, spent billions of dollars relying on those credits. So we'll see if the plug got pulled on those, people would be a little pissed off. And so we'll see how that plays out. There was a whole $8 billion for 7 regional hydrogen hubs awarded. That's a question. Does the president view hydrogen as an all of the above or not? That's an open question. It hasn't been answered. So those projects are in a little bit of limbo at the moment. We'll see what the hell happens there. Do I think that solar is on the chopping block? I frankly, this is Brad. What do I know? I don't think so. I think that the uptake in solar has been so much, and we need part of the all of the above strategy comes down to the amount of energy that we as a U.S. society consume is not flatline or down. Our population continues to grow, and therefore, even if we all stay the same, the amount of energy we would want or need will grow. Yeah. If you think about your kids, what's going on in your kitchen. Yeah, everyone's got a laptop. Everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's got kind of some other device, Game Boy, whatever it is. The amount of consumption of energy is going up. And so the need for more power is going to increase. Where one gets that power, nuclear, natural gas, coal, hopefully not, remains to be seen. And so that's why the permitting piece is important. You're going to see, I think, a renewed focus on nuclear. As a clean fuel, that's a good thing, but it's expensive. So how do you sort of make that work? So nuclear, I think, will be safe if not incented. Natural gas will be incented. I think the solar credits, because of the amount of people working in solar, and because 95% of our solar panels still come from China. We don't make solar panels here. Why? Because the Chinese were smart about this 15 years ago, and they undercut all the U.S. companies that were manufacturing and put them out of business.
Yep.
And, say what you want about tariffs, because I'm not a fan, but there was no protection on the U.S. solar companies that were manufacturing. So you don't find solar panels being manufactured here. So some level of incentive to get manufacturing here. Why? Because there's 450,000 jobs in solar now. That's a 10-fold increase from 10 years ago. There's only 60,000 coal jobs. So, there's a math there. It's 400,000 votes versus 60,000 votes. It's not that one vote's more important than the other. It's the total there. And so they're not dumb. They will see that math and run that math. So my personal view is that solar will survive. Wind will not for the next 4 years. EVs will not, unless at the kind of state, local level. I think the production tax credits for hydrogen should survive. It feels more like an all the above than not. I think you'll see some level of dollars and or infrastructure money and or credits going towards liquefied natural gas. The administration's already said liquefied natural gas and the sale of it afar is important. So whether that's to the EU or the UK and or Ukraine, wherever, we end up with Ukraine, friend or foe, whole other thing. So you would think that if Ukraine is not buying, gas from Russia, they would buy from us. So you would think that would be a natural partner to trade with. Who knows? Remains to be seen a little bit. But from 10 years ago, we were not allowed to export liquefied natural gas. Those rules changed. Under Trump 1, we became one of the largest exporters of liquefied natural gas. That slowed down during the Biden administration. I think the Trump administration 2 is looking to re-ramp that up and, see that as a trading chip relative to our ability to supply the world with natural gas. Now, again, that's a whole other geopolitical conversation on if you wanted to counter Russia's ability to export natural gas and get paid for it to fund their economy, you would want that. Does this administration want to be a friend of Russia or a foe? Who knows? Beyond my, event horizon.
Many of my listeners will be pleased to hear your assessment on the solar tax credit. So thank you for that. It's frustrating around the others, but
Yeah.
we'll get today. When implementing renewable energy projects, what legal pitfalls should, say, a real estate developer be watching out for?
It's a good question. So, which is longer than today. So we can come back and have that conversation because there's a bunch. At the moment, if one was focusing on a solar project, so am I doing a PPA where I don't really care, or power purchase agreement, sorry, or am I doing? I'm going to hire somebody like you guys to design it, install it. I'm going to own it, and then I'm going to hire Omnidian to maintain it. Okay, well, if I'm going to do that, you got to look at what's the timing risk. So in some states, the interconnect risk to connect to the utility is like a year and a half. I mean, that's a long time. During that time frame, if somebody's project federally, if they decided, well, we don't think you should have this investment tax credit of 30% or 60% if it's US made, or the depreciation should be like, 50 years, not, immediate on the accelerated depreciation. Any of those variables change, it changes the total dynamic of the project economics. And so I'd want to be pretty damn sure before I committed capital to doing a project that the credit's still there. Now, me to you and the audience, we'll keep this amongst ourselves, the thousands of people that are listening. Look, if you have a permit and you're relying on the ITC, so, we've gotten our allocation, we've gotten our SREX, and we're proceeding ahead with the design install. I feel relatively comfortable that there's not a, risk from the government not giving you the tax credit. They've tried to retroactively do some stuff under the current administration. I don't think that survives a fight. The real question is your project big enough to want to fight the federal government if they say to you, you don't get that credit anymore? For $1 million project, no, you're not, it's not worth the, there's no juice there to squeeze, not enough juice. And so I think if that happened with solar, trade association would get together and there would be some, ruffled feathers. And so then probably lawsuits in the courts. I think if you have permits, you can proceed, even though it's potentially risky. If you don't have permits, it gets more and more concerning until there's a public statement that says, we're going to keep this in place. Okay. Because you're taking economic risk. If you're willing to roll the dice because you're a believer in the product and you think that, hey, the panels and the inverters are good for 15 years and 25 years, I'll make it up over 25 years. Most people don't think that way. But if you thought that way and said, it's for my house, who cares? Or I own this office building and we're a user. Okay. But if you're an owner of an office building, you're an owner of an industrial warehouse, and you're thinking about like a $15 million deployment and you're not sure you're going to get money back, and the rate isn't going to get you that, so existing rates, whatever, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, and you're going to charge the 10 and 10, you're going to make it back. What's your payback period? Is it 5 years? Is it 7? Are you willing to go 20? Most aren't willing to go more than 3. So it gets a little tricky though.
How are opportunity zone developments incorporating sustainability into their planning? Or what are you seeing around opportunity zone development?
Wow, that's also a whole other hour. That's a big question there. So I do a lot of opportunity zone work. We've closed, I don't know, like 410 of these transactions since 2018. I'm a big believer in opportunity zones, longer than today, and a lot of conversation there. So you can sort of like it because it provides incredible incentives for the owner developer of a business or real estate in a zone. You can like it because it drives capital to low, moderate income areas and hopefully hires local talent, people of color, people that live in the neighborhood, whichever sort of side of the coin you're on. It was positive. So big believer in the OZ program. The OZ program in and of itself has not driven sustainability.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not opposed to it, but the developers that are playing there, the business owners that are opening businesses, I have not seen in my deals and travels around the country on that topic. It's not sustainability that's driving it. They're not opposed, and where they're interested, they do it. But the sustainability incentives, kind of what we're talking about, the ITC and some other things, are helpful to a deal, but it's not, they don't do it because of that incentive.
Right.
It's also, again, you used to hear this a lot in OC. It's kind of gone by the way, so I guess lately. But you don't do an OZ deal for the tax benefit. You do an OZ deal because the deal makes sense. The tax benefit is the kind of cherry on the sundae. It's a big cherry if you get the right project. I mean, the bigger the project, the more you're not paying capital gains at the end of 10 years.
Yep.
So if you and I invested in a smoothie place for $1 million and we sold it for $10 million after 10 years when we followed the rules, that $9 million of gain, we wouldn't pay anything on at the federal level. And in most states, other than California, we wouldn't pay at the state level. So you're talking about a 40 cents on the dollar savings on, in my example, $9 million. So that, it's $3.6 million. Now, that works and the math is compelling. It's real, but you got to go from $1 million to 10 million.
Yeah.
Is that possible in a smoothie place? I don't know. Probably not, unless you're selling marijuana with it. Maybe. But, where you got a real estate project, that's not outside the realm of possibility. Where you got a business that just takes off. If we had a cancer cure and we were working, we had a business in the zone and we invest in that business, you started with like two guys in a smock in a closet, and all of a sudden it's 1,000 employees and you sold the company for a couple $1 billion. Well, that's real. And that would work for the right set of facts in the opportunity zone. They don't necessarily dovetail with sustainability. There's nothing required under the rules on sustainable design, sustainable construction. That said, a lot of developers, whether they're D or R, they understand that, hey, if I can save money on common area, or if I can save my tenants money, then maybe they'll come to my building. They do it because they think there's a return on it, which makes it kind of the right thing to do, not right necessarily for the environment, right for the project. So I do think that you're seeing a lot of sustainable features in OZ deals. Again, not because of anything in the OZ, but because the owner developer sees it as a way to reduce consumption and earn money that way.
You just got me like infinitely more excited about
We'll come back to OZs because there's so much to talk about, dude. Meaning,
we're gonna
it's
have
a high likelihood of change the OZ program under the Trump administration. It will likely get extended. There will likely be reporting. It's highly possible that there will be industrial zones that are added. It's even possible that instead of capital gains counting, which they count now, capital gains will continue to count, but so will ordinary income.
Wow.
So if you and I invested ordinary income in a project, that doesn't exist right now. So if that happened, the theory is that would democratize the OZ program. Anybody, you put $25 in, it would work. But when they put together the program, it was only capital gains in order to drive capital gains into these projects.
Yeah.
Well, folks in the neighborhood don't always have capital gains. And so you were sort of excluding a whole class of investors because they didn't necessarily have capital gains. If you said, well, ordinary income counted, well, then everybody could invest because everybody has kind of $1 or $2 in their pocket if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket. So that would be a whole other thing. So that's coming down the pike, Sean, which is it's going to happen as part of the tax reconciliation bill, one way or the other. Is it going to be permanent or is it going to be a 2-year extension? Who the hell knows? Depends on if it's Monday or Tuesday. But something is definitely going to happen in the OZ, and it's going to spur a lot more conversation on that front.
You've hinted at this a couple of times, but how do you see public-private partnerships evolving in today's environment to create more sustainable development in the commercial real estate marketplace?
You had me until the last part. So I see a lot of public-private partnerships. Now that's loosely defined.
Yeah.
Typically a P3 is a specific animal, which is a public good, like a courthouse, a parking garage near a transit. So that's traditional P3.
Yeah.
Money comes from the federal or state government to help support a project. Project tends to be long in duration. So a developer will come, build it, own it for 30, 40 years, and then turn it back over to the municipality at the end of that period. So think about airports, ports, libraries, things of that sort. Okay, that's the traditional model. You morph that a little bit to, well, is an opportunity zone a public-private partnership? No, not traditionally, but one could argue the federal government has given up its right to collect capital gains. So one could say, well, that's their contribution. It's not a dollar contribution, but it allows the project to sizzle a little bit relative to a good project.
Mhm.
And so are those projects all public-private partnerships? No, but maybe you could argue that. Where a developer builds something in a challenged area, a low moderate income area that might have some issues, that could be, again, is infrastructure dollars going to assist that project? Maybe you could argue that. Where we've got federal programs like the Transportation Infrastructure Facilities Improvement Act or the Water Infrastructure Facilities Improvement Act, early on to find out whether the current administration, Trump 2, uses those programs to build stuff. When you hear presidents talk about infrastructure, those are the programs we're talking about. And so those programs are like 35-year money at the applicable federal rate, up to 49% of the project cost. And the repayment of that loan doesn't start until 5 years after substantial completion. So that's almost like free equity from the federal government.
Yep.
So is that to me, that's pretty public-private partnership. Others would say it's not, Peter. Again, those programs don't tend to stroke off of having some level of sustainability. The programs that do tend to be more, ironically, on the affordable housing side. So affordable housing advocates have argued, hey, our people can't afford, heat or air conditioning or gas. So we want the most efficient equipment in this building for the longest period of time so that we can reduce their costs, which totally makes sense, except for the fact that the upfront cost for that tends to be a little bit higher than crappy stuff. And so you're investing for a long period of time as opposed to a short period of time. And so the cost per unit of affordable housing becomes slightly unaffordable, in the program. But the affordable housing programs in many states have a lot of green features as requirements because people have gone and advocated, on that behalf that they want the residents that can't typically afford traditional housing to be able to stay in places where it costs less to operate, would be the idea. So far, many of so we sort of say the IRA programs, whether it's production tax credits, whether it's solar, whether it's that stuff, one could say it was clean energy because it was, but it wasn't sustainability features. It was energy related. Maybe it's the same, but I don't think so.
All right. Final round.
Yeah.
Lightning round. 2-sentence answer each 5 questions. These are your hottest takes. And I'm just going to turn this into its own separate thing.
Cool.
Number 1, solar, wind, or other. What's your bet for the dominant renewable energy source by 2030?
I'm going to ask you a question first, and I'll answer. When you say dominant source, are you talking about new generation of power, new, or are we talking about total of all generation? Because that's a very different answer.
Let's say new in between now and 2030, specific to the commercial real estate side.
Okay, so new generation of power, you're cheating. New generation of power in the last 5 years, solar and wind have been the dominant player.
Yep.
Much more than coal, much more than natural gas. Okay. And definitely more than petroleum. Petroleum tends to go into transportation. That's a whole different thing. Okay. So if we're talking about new generation, the only challenge, it won't be wind, it would be solar, with a footnote of, if nuclear could get its act together, you're going to see some more nuclear. I think small modular reactors are going to be a thing. That's been talked about for 10 years and it hasn't been a thing, but I do think that the time is right for that. But I still think that solar is easier to deploy, will be deployed faster and in smaller scale, so it'll add up. When you do a nuclear reactor, you're talking 1,000 megawatts. So it's a big deployment, but it takes 20 years to get going. That's what they need to fix. So I think solar, maybe some modular nuclear.
Great answer. What is we like to say prop tech, a property technology solution that you've seen lately that you're impressed by or excited about for the future?
I have seen, so this is something that nobody loves. I love indoor air quality.
Mm.
I've seen some tech that measures and monitors indoor air quality and alerts people to what's going on. That to me is very cool. No one's paying attention to that. Like COVID was like never happened. Like nobody cared. Nobody cared before COVID about indoor air quality. Nobody cares after COVID. Like I care about that. They're like it's like a fascinating thing to me on human behavior. Why people don't give a that's a legal term. And so I've seen some very cool stuff on indoor air quality of late. There's some other really cool stuff in the data center area on not having to use water to cool and it's liquefied coolant, sort of taking geothermal. Very cool stuff. So that's coming. Like geothermal still hasn't seen the light of day for all intents and purposes. I think geothermal is making progress.
What's the first or most important sustainability metric your clients should be checking each morning when they wake up?
Energy.
Yep.
Energy usage. So energy, water, waste to me is kind of the three big ones. Energy, of those three, energy the most relevant. That said, if you're out in the West Coast where there's all kinds of fires, water is precious. So it's not priced that way yet, but it will be. And so energy with water are a close second.
Okay. If you had 10 million, 100 million, whatever, to invest today in one sustainability initiative, what would it be?
My own money or somebody else's money?
Your money.
I haven't put 10 million in, but I put a couple of nickels. A whole different conversation around PFAS, forever chemicals. I can bore you with this for a long, long time. All my friends will tell you, oh my God, he's talking about PFAS again. PFAS is, and my wife's laughing in the background. PFAS will be, and is the biggest issue that we're going to face over the next 20 years. These forever chemicals are in our water, they're in our furniture, they're in our clothes, they're in firefighting foam, they're in firefighting equipment, they're in our blood. And if we went and found somebody in Antarctica or China or you pick a country, 98% of the people in the world have PFAS in their blood. And we have no way of eradicating that. Once it's in your blood, it doesn't leave. So it bioaccumulates. Major hoo-ha. And the class action lawsuits being filed like there is no tomorrow. You just don't see it because it's not reported in the papers. I get these scrapes of information, and they're not one or two things long. They're like every day of something else going on there. So I would invest my 10 or $100 million in a PFAS eradication technology. Right now, we can trap PFAS, but once we trap it, typically those trapping technologies, in order to get rid of it, you would burn it at a high temperature. The unfortunate thing with PFAS is if you do that, it off gases and it's worse because then you breathe it. Much worse. Okay, so you need to get that temperature up very quickly to a very high number. And there's a couple of pieces of technology out there that can do that. They just need to be able to, they need to take that and be able to scale it. So I've seen technology that can hit on that. And, I put peanuts into it, but we'll see how that plays out. I think that that is real and that will be needed. It's needed, by the federal government. For DOD's been sued in a class action lawsuit, the Department of Defense. It's needed, to deal with the firefighters who have sued. It's needed to deal with a bunch of service people who have been sued. It's needed for all of our waterways near airports where firefighting foam has been deployed, in test cases. So unfortunately, it's a bit ubiquitous. It's everywhere. There's maps that the EPA used to have. Who knows? They may have been taken down. But the EPA used to have interesting maps where you'd look where you live and you'd be like, holy blank. Really? That's where I live. How can that? This stuff is everywhere. Every state has issues. I mean, it's crazy. So PFAS fighting technology, eradicating.
That is super cool, actually. I'm going to have to go big into that now.
Dude, there's a rabbit hole that I've been digging in for about a year and a half. Start with the Mark Ruffalo movie, which some say is a little sensationalized, but start with Dark Waters. That's your introduction.
I think this is my favorite conversation of the year so far. Before we wrap up, if someone's interested in learning more from you and your expertise, or someone at Duane Morris, where's the best place for them to go to get more information?
They're welcome to call my cell. If you get voicemail, do not leave a voicemail. Bad, I'm not listening to them. So email, text, any of that stuff.
You want to share your email?
Sure. So it's BA, my last name, MOLOTSKY. So BA Molotsky at DuaneMorris.com. DUANE. MORRIS, like the cat.com. Duane Morris. Nothing to do with the cat, but like the cat. DuaneMorris.com. BA Molotsky at DuaneMorris.com.
This time it's you aging yourself. That wasn't on me with the Morris.
Fair enough.
Such a pleasure, Brad. And to all my listeners, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Future of CRE Sustainability. I'll see you next time.